Are you bored of always playing the same loadouts for your favorite class? Looking to mix things up a little bit? Well, in that case, here's TF2's 9 most underrated weapons that you should give a try. These weapons might not be the best in their respective weapon slots, but they're a lot more useful than they get credit for. If you haven't used any of these in a while, you should give them a shot. Number 1. Almost every scout player sticks to the stock scattergun for its unmatched damage potential, but if you're getting bored of that, go ahead and equip the Force of Nature. This scattergun might only have a third of the clip size, but it has so many positives that make it so fun, like how it can deal more damage than stock at close ranges, or how it reloads the whole clip at the same time.
Sweet!
But nobody uses the Force of Nature for those reasons, because by far the best part of this weapon is its knockback mechanic. You can knock enemies off cliffs or into hazards, or even just get them out of your melee range. The recoil this gun does also knocks you back as well, which can be used to move around the map in some pretty interesting ways. You might not deal as much damage as you would with stock, but that doesn't mean this weapon isn't a fun time. Number 2. For this next soldier weapon, this one's not as much underrated as it is underused. Many different YouTubers have made videos praising the Battalion's Backup, and it's for good reason. But despite this, you almost never see anyone actually using the thing. Maybe these soldiers don't have trust in their teammates or something, but when this banner is used properly, it can have devastating effects. The damage resistance makes your team so much tankier, and the crit resistance can completely nullify a ton of different weapons, including the whole point of the crit streak. And on top of that, you get a nice extra 20 health as well. Why does almost no one use this thing? Number 3. Pyro's weapon catalog is very well rated, but there's still one weapon that doesn't quite get all the credit that it deserves. The backburner is already fairly popular, but in my opinion it should be much more popular than it is. You get guaranteed critical hits from behind enemies, and it isn't very hard to get behind people through either flank routes or using the jetpack. It does a similar damage to the Phlogisnator in this regard, but the best part is you can still airblast people. Yeah, sure, it's a little more expensive, but just having the ability to do it at all can save you in so many situations. The backburner is just really good. More people should definitely use it. Number 4. Now when it comes to Demo Man, there's 2 different weapons that are both horribly underrated. These are of course the forgotten sticky bomb launchers, the quickie bomb launcher and the Scottish Resistance. Both of these launchers are great, but will forever live in the shadow of their much more popular older brother, the stock sticky bomb launcher. Of course, stock is great, probably one of the best weapons in the entire game, but there's so many scenarios in which the Scottish or the quickie launcher are the more practical options. The Scottish Resistance triples the effectiveness of sticky traps, which are already an extremely strong and consistent kill getter, and the quickie launcher is far more effective than stock at long ranges, while still being almost just as effective at mid-range. I know the stock launcher is really good, but give the others a try sometimes. Number 5. Heavy's most underrated weapon is the Eviction Notice. Nah, I'm obviously just kidding. Playing with the Eviction Notice is a worse experience than getting one in real life. Heavy's actual most underrated weapon is the stock shotgun, and I guess you could also count the panic attack and the family business for the same reasons. The stock shotgun is consistent, reliable, and a solid damage, but for some reason most people would prefer a sandwich or a banana over this beautiful gun. The shotgun can provide that quick burst of damage you need to finish someone off, and it can also help you out when you don't have the time to rev up your minigun. Number 6. Moving on to Engineer, this is another classic example of a really cool and interesting weapon being completely overshadowed by a frankly overpowered option in the same slot. The short circuit is much more useful than people give it credit for. Being able to delete rockets and grenades from existence is really useful for not just protecting your sentry gun, but for your teammates and even yourself as well. Yeah, the metal cost might be pretty high, but if you stand near a dispenser or the payload cart, you can effectively spam this thing to completely counter the soldier or demo. That being said, most people will probably just equip the Wrangler, because in all honesty, the Wrangler is probably better. Still, give the short circuit a try. It's a lot more fun than the Wrangler at least. Next up is the Medic. With his primary and melee options being limited to literally one option each, he's the epitome of the meta. And for his medigun selection, they're all viable, but almost everybody agrees stock is probably the best for most scenarios. With that being said, I would recommend giving the Kritzkrieg a try. Yeah, I know it's really not that underrated, loads of people use it, but in my opinion it's still pretty overlooked. The ability to do triple damage with no fall off is pretty crazy, but since your Uber target can still die just as easily, a lot of the usefulness of this medigun is tied to how good your teammates are. If you Uber the wrong person, you're probably gonna die really fast. But if you get lucky and Uber an absolute god, the enemy team stands no chance. When you use this thing, you're really just taking a gamble that your teammates are going to be good, and when it pays off, it can be amazingly strong. Number 8. Sniper's most underrated weapon is, believe it or not, the stock SMG. Many new players fall into the trap of only using unlockable weapons because they're cooler, but it takes a good player to realize that the consistent mid-range damage provided by the stock SMG is more often than not way more useful than the Girardi or the Razorback are. It provides a tool to deal with enemies who are too close to snipe but too far to melee, and it can also help to finish enemies off that you've already hit shots on from long distances. Don't underestimate the damage of the SMG, it's actually surprisingly solid. If you're an experienced player, you probably already know how strong the SMG can be, but if you're new to the game, just remember that unlockable weapons aren't always better than the original. In fact, most of the time it's the other way around. Last on the list of classes is Gaben's favorite himself, the Spy. Spy has a huge list of underrated weapons, but probably the most underrated of them all is the Ambassador. For some reason, everybody seems to share the opinion that it sucks because of the damage falloff nerf it got in Jungle Inferno, but that nerf was really not that bad. If you can aim and hit headshots, it's just a better stock revolver most of the time, and while the Diamondback is still probably better overall, the Ambassador can still be more useful a lot of the time, especially when you just respawn and haven't had the chance to get a stab or a sap yet. The only issue is that hitting headshots does require a fair amount of skill, but if you're playing Spy properly and sneaking behind the enemy, you should be able to get some easy headshots on people who aren't expecting you. Honorable mentions. The Babyface's blaster, like the Ambassador, gets a bad rep because of a single nerf that it got years ago. It's really not as bad as everyone says it is. It does the same damage as stock, and sure, you can lose all your boost by only taking 25 damage, but at full boost you're moving so fast that you can dodge enemy attacks much easier, making this downside not as bad as it seems, but still, it's not good enough to make the list. The Enforcer is always joked about as being Spy's most useless gun, but really, it doesn't deserve all the hate. The damage bonus while disguised means this thing can be used to finish off weak enemies that your teammates have already damaged, which is even easier when as the Spy you're already behind the enemy team. And the firing speed penalty doesn't even matter in this case because you only need one shot to finish them off. The Solemn Vow doesn't make the list because it's completely overshadowed by the Ubersaw, but its unique ability to see enemy health can actually be really powerful with a coordinated team. You can use voice chat to tell your teammates which enemies are low, and they can use that info to decide who to target. Granted, this does require your team being competent, which isn't always the case in pubs. The last honorable mention on the list is the Man-Treads. The control these things give you while rocket jumping is absolutely insane, and when paired with the Rocket Jumper and Market Gardener, you become a terrifying threat. But the reason I can't call this weapon good is because on almost any other loadout, it's just kind of terrible. Since it takes up your secondary slot, you can't even use the conch or the gunboats to make up for that extra blast damage, and so you're probably just gonna end up blowing yourself up. Still, in the right scenarios, it's crazy useful. And there you have it. Those are what I believe to be the most underrated TF2 weapons for each class. Remember that this is all just my opinion and based on how I personally feel about stuff. If you think there's a different weapon that's more underrated, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you think this channel is underrated, consider subscribing.